All right, I gotta give Eurogamer a big shout out because this interview right here, published on October 8th, 2021, the interview was conducted by Wesley Yin Poole. This interview actually asked EA the tough questions. I've always wondered when, news outlets get a hold of EA executives why they aren't asking questions about the gambling regulations that seek to regulate loot boxes and all the qualms that people have about what is essentially gambling in a soccer game. But this interview actually does exactly that, and I'm going to go through all the questions and the key bits and relay my thoughts on all of this. But the bottom line here is that Eurogamer asked fantastic questions and EA provided truly awful, nonsensical, contradictory, dismissive answers. So let's begin. Let's scroll down here with the first key question where Eurogamer talked about the monetization side of Ultimate Team is problematic. And then Eurogamer aptly points out how EA's messaging seems different for every game. EA has glorified the removal of loot boxes before by announcing, we are happy to announce that loot boxes won't be in Battlefield or Battlefront and yada, yada, yada. But with FIFA, that's the one golden goose that gets special treatment. And Eurogamer aptly points this out. It seems hypocritical, I think, that EA would, on one hand, say all these things about their strategy for one game or games and then do a completely different thing for FIFA. How do you justify that disconnect? And the justification Chris Bruzzo, the EA executive that was interviewed, provided was that, games are different from one another. They all have different requirements, different game with a different set of decisions and different circumstances. There's nothing particularly special about FIFA that makes it more prone and more suited to have gambling implemented into it. Yes, different games have different sets of requirements, but gambling certainly isn't one of them, and certainly isn't a thing that makes the game more fun, more enjoyable. Bruzzo then notes how many people play FIFA. 100 million people played FIFA in some form or another last year. We have a huge fan base of players who love the mode the way it's set up today, and they love every aspect of it. Most people tolerate what's there because FIFA is the only way they can have a FIFA video game experience. EA has sort of a monopoly on soccer video games, soccer simulation games. Essentially, it's the most authentic experience you can have, but EA shoves the gambling in there, knowing the huge player base that they have and knowing that they can be taken advantage of because these are fans who, have an emotional connection to the players that they're gambling for. And I'm not saying that there aren't people who genuinely love these games, but this guy is just outright dismissing the many, many, many people who are getting sick and tired of the FIFA formula and its implementation of gambling and its awful, egregious, greedy monetization systems. Bruzzo then tries to play the victim. Your article so far has generated over 220 comments. Some of them keep me up at night. It is tough to sometimes feel like the work that the dedicated people are putting into the game is so easily dismissed, specifically pointing out that, there are real developers, real people working on this game, and how a lot of vitriol is directed at them. But Eurogamer points out there is no ill will directed at the designers of the gameplay, the people we see when they do the preview presentations, the people who are designing gameplay changes, and the way the modes function in a changing from year to year way. It's about the monetization, it's about loot boxes and the way they work. It might be about the people who are making the decisions. Hit the nail on the head when I criticize FIFA. I know that the ground floor developers are just doing what they're supposed to do. I don't blame the ground floor developers. I blame the scumbag greedy executives who are at the core of these decisions that drive the direction of FIFA games, that drive the fact that they're essentially soccer-themed casino. The decision makers, the higher-ups, the managers, the directors, the executives, these are the people who the anger and the backlash is being directed at, and rightfully so, because what they're doing is really, really scummy. Now, Bruzzo tries to claim here that that's a difference without a distinction, actually. These are all real people, and so am I, an executive of EA. We should be treated like people, too. Well, you gotta give respect in order to get it back, and the decision makers at EA, the decision makers behind FIFA, clearly do not respect people enough to consider the damage that FIFA is doing psychologically and financially, even with all the research that's out there telling them that. with government officials telling them, hey, you got to stop this. This is getting too much. FIFA keeps fighting back and trying to maintain the status quo because it makes them money. That's what it's always about. It may be convenient to separate the developers from everyone else. It's actually not real. Yes, it is absolutely real. Executives make millions of dollars, and they're the ones who get to steer the ship. You guys have power that the ground floor developers don't. The ground floor developers are just doing what they're supposed to do. But at the end of the day, the commands come from the top. It's the people at the top saying, implement those loot boxes. Regardless of whether ground floor developers think that's good or bad for the game, they gotta follow those directions. For this man to claim that the gap between ground floor developers and decision makers, executives, is a difference without a distinction is complete bullshit. They're very different roles. They're very different circumstances. And the reason people have a tough time seeing executives as human beings is because they behave in the most inhumane ways, dishing out bullshit and implementing whatever shady business scheme in order to raise those stock prices to please investors. These are people who use human beings as cattle for monetization rather than seeing people that they're selling their products to as real human beings who are affected by these products, and in the case of FIFA, oftentimes psychologically and financially negatively. Then when directly asked why have loot boxes in FIFA in the first place, the response Vrba provided was, we want to strengthen the connection between the real world sport and the game. In the real world, you don't purchase loot boxes for the chance to earn players and then add them to your team, and then loot boxes come nowhere in play in the real world. That's purely a video game thing. Progress, engagement, this builds just like it does in the real world season. We have created these things over a long period of time to actually mirror what it feels like, the tough strategic choices you have to make when you're putting a squad together that works uniquely as the squad you want to manage, that you want to play with. That's why it all fits together the way it does. And let's not forget, there's a transfer market. There is nothing strategic about purchasing loot boxes. You throw a bunch of money and pray that the results are what you want it to be. Hell, at least in poker, you got a chance to play the player, whereas with loot boxes, there's no way to play the system. You throw some money at it and hope for the best. That's not strategy. Those aren't tough choices. Okay, now get this. Eurogamer pointed out you're buying gameplay affecting items. Your loot box contains players you use and play in a competitive multiplayer mode. And Chris Bruzzo responded, just like real football. Excuse me? In real life, teams don't go out and gamble for the chance and hope that they get a specific player. They buy players outright, directly. They have a set price point, and there's negotiations involved. Also, FIFA is a video game. It doesn't 100% have to simulate real life. The first priority of a video game is that it should be fun. That's why player characters run at 40 miles per hour in video games and don't truly simulate the actual natural walking or running speed in real life, because that makes the game less tedious and more fun. That's what FIFA needs to pursue. Sure, the mechanics of playing the soccer game, that being as close to real life as possible, that's all good and well, but if you start adding elements of real life that diminish the game's fun factor, then we got a problem. And when it comes to gambling and having to choose between paying a lot of money or wasting a lot of time in order to get a certain player that has such a low probability of being earned that most players will never earn this player from FIFA packs, that should not be a feature in a game if it diminishes the fun factor, and many will agree that it absolutely does. And yeah, Eurogamer points out, in real football, you don't buy a loot box and you get what players you get. You go out and buy a player directly if you can afford it. With card packs, Eurogamer notes there are probabilities involved. You don't know who you're gonna get. That's not real football. Look how Bruzzo then deflects here. Let me be very, very clear about this point. 9 out of 10 FIFA Ultimate Team packs that are open in FIFA are open with coins. Coins are earned by playing the game. That's not real world money. I love how he has no comeback for Eurogamer's retort on his point that FIFA Ultimate Team is like real football, which it absolutely isn't. So he then shifts to statistics. Well, most people buy FIFA card packs with coins. Most packs purchases aren't made with real money. But Eurogamer aptly argues, but the point is you can pay to win in this game. You can spend real money, and it is a much faster way to do so. The game entices and lures players into money spending. Bruiser responded, so interesting how we just gloss over the fact that 9 out of 10 FIFA Ultimate Team packs are opened with coins. And it's so funny that you, Bruzo, gloss over the fact that 1 out of 10 FIFA card packs being opened with real money is a significant sum. We're talking about millions upon millions of packs that are opened with real money. This is the equivalent of somebody trying to argue that alcoholism isn't a real issue because only a minority of drinkers are alcoholics. It's like if that person said, it's like you're dismissing the fact that most people who drink alcohol aren't alcoholics, but there are enough people who fall into the depths of alcoholism that this is an issue worth bringing up, and that's why alcohol is regulated, because it can be dangerous, and gambling and loot boxes are similar in that way, where they can prove to be dangerous to, sure, a minority of players, but a significant minority. Eurogamer clapped back with, you can pay to win in FIFA, how can you deny that? Bruiser responded, in real-world football, you can use resources to assemble the best squad possible, and in our video game, you can use either FIFA Ultimate Team coins or FIFA points, and 9 out of 10 packs are open with FIFA Ultimate Team coins, which are earned by players who are playing the game. And the other really important thing is that 78% of all FIFA 21 players never spend anything in the game, Wes. Yes, real-world football is a business. A video game should not be a business within itself. It should just be a video game. Does that not go through your heads? We don't want real football business elements within our football video game. And even then, we're not even talking about equivalences here, because the real money aspect of the FIFA video games is gambling, an aspect that isn't reflective of how real football works. So just all of his points fall apart like a house of cards. And here he comes again with the statistics. The majority of players never spend anything in a game. So what, the 22% who do don't matter just because 22 is a smaller number than 78%? Not to mention that 22% is still a significant percentage. And given the player base of FIFA, we're talking millions, tens of millions of people. And when Eurogamer once again repeated, the point is you can pay your way, and many people do. Bruzo's response was, and that's called choice. That's called player choice. Players have a choice. What choice? You were the ones who implemented loot boxes even though people didn't want it. And what choices are there? There are two evils to choose from. You either grind for years and years and likely will never earn the specific players that you're looking for to make your dream team, or you spend a ludicrous amount of money in the hopes that you get the player that you want before you spend too much, before you get addicted, before your brain gets hooked to the dopamine release that can be caused by this gambling feature. That's like saying this bully did nothing wrong because the victim at least had a choice between getting their lunch taken or having their money taken. And then when Bruiser was asked, they have the choice to what? Pay to win? Bruiser responded with, well, we have heard your concerns and we have been taking active steps to mitigate some of what's perceived as the harmful nature of FIFA, so we have put probabilities in our packs. Saying a player has a less than 1% chance of being earned tells you absolutely nothing. Less than 1% could mean 1 in 1,000 or 1 in a billion. You don't know, and that's a big difference. He then touts how we launched FIFA Playtime, which is a feature in game that allows you to track your playtime and spending and place limits and whatever. But FIFA games don't promote this feature. They don't warn of the dangers of loot boxes and that these limits should be set. That's there as a little bone to throw to the encroaching government officials and regulators. But the question ultimately is EA doing enough to prevent the issue of players spending too much, of getting addicted to what is essentially gambling? And the answer is a resounding no. They're fighting back against government officials who are attempting to regulate this stuff. They're doing everything in their power to give off this image that loot boxes are fun surprise mechanics. They're doing the bare minimum to make it seem like they're being proactive. But are they actually being truly proactive? I think most would argue, hell no. And that's the opinion that I have. Bruzo also insisted that the pay-to-win argument is irrelevant because this is a game of skill. If I had the very best squad in FIFA Ultimate Team, I would lose to you every single time. It's about skill, he says. And look, Don't get me wrong, there's an element of skill certainly that comes into play, but what if two players are evenly matched in terms of skill, but one player just happened to have more money than the other? Eurogamer makes a note of this. If I go online in a competitive game of FIFA Ultimate Team, as many millions of people do, and I see the squad of my opponent, I do not know if that person has obtained that squad by spending money on loot boxes or has obtained that squad through gameplay. So I could lose to that team who is being played by someone who has a similar skill to me, who has an advantage because they have better players, faster, more powerful, better players. I don't know if they have thrown £1,000 since the game has come out at FIFA and obtained those players through loot boxes. I have no way of knowing. That is an inherently pay-to-win experience. I don't know how you can deny that. And you can tell Bruzo really has no argument against this. He brings out statistics again. Well, 9 out of 10 FIFA Ultimate Team packs are bought with FIFA Ultimate Coins. Yeah, that's fine. There's still that 1 out of 10 packs that are bought with real-world money, and 1 out of 10 is a significant enough figure. And Eurogamer says, but my opponent might have been the 1 out of 10. And Bruzo insists, well, we have studied this. We study this constantly, and I assure you, FIFA Ultimate Team is far and away a game of skill, and the player skill is by far the fundamental contributor to the player success rate, not answering the point, what if two players are evenly matched, one of them just happens to be rich or addicted enough that they spend all this money on the best players. What then? This player has paid to win. They have gambled to win. How does Bruzo not see this point? Or rather, he sees the point, he just refuses to actually address this because he knows that doing so would screw him. Eurogamer then brings up regulators. Research done by UK universities came out and said that there was a link between loot boxes and gambling. Are they wrong? Bruzo responded, we also have lots of regulators who have come out to say that loot boxes are not gambling. Correction, that said that within the current language of the law, loot boxes aren't considered gambling. That doesn't mean that they aren't actually looking into it. That doesn't mean there aren't concerns, and that doesn't mean there aren't considerations to change the law to reflect the fact that loot boxes look, sound, and behave and affect people exactly like gambling does. Or at least similarly enough that they cannot go entirely unregulated. Bruzo continues, and researchers too, there actually isn't consensus at this point on this topic. In Australia, in France, and Sweden, and Denmark, all the regulators have all said, no, we're not going to regulate this under gambling laws. I'm going to quote Bruzo here and say it's interesting that you gloss over the fact that there are tons of articles out there detailing how kids in particular have gone on a spending spree, not knowing any better, without that impulse control. It's funny that you should gloss over, Bruzo, the fact that when FIFA players were interviewed, teenagers in particular, but also adults, when they were interviewed about FIFA and whether they believe that this is a pay-to-win game, most of them have pretty much said, yeah, it's frustrating. This is pay-to-win, and it does feel like gambling. The Children's Commission in the UK, I believe, straight up got testimonials from a bunch of FIFA players, many of them young, and they have corroborated the sense that this is pay to win and gambling. But none of that goes addressed because that's what EA does. They are very selective about the feedback that they take. It's all about that confirmation bias rather than actually looking at the full picture because of that green, that cheddar, that money. Bruzo then says, I'll speak for myself. When I hear about an individual who spent too much time or too much money in FIFA, it pains me. Oh yeah, I'm sure you lose sleep over that. It drives us, actually. We don't want that. I'm sure Andrew Wilson is so concerned about this issue. We're not building the game for that. Really? No. Shut the hell up. The game is strictly built for that. In fact, a presentation, a PowerPoint slide of some sort, I remember leaked, about how their ultimate goal is to drive as many players as possible from other modes to FIFA Ultimate Team, their big moneymaker. This is exactly what they want. They want players to get hooked to this stuff. They want that engagement, as they call it. So it drives me to want to encourage things like FIFA playtime dashboards, to encourage parental controls, to spend real dollars with organizations like Internet Matters, to massively increase awareness around how many controls parents have around spending, not just in our game, but in all games. So we're ready. We will work on real solutions, but we need to get to some kind of consensus. So listing out a bunch of minimal actions and initiatives that they've taken that ultimately have had no significant impact, and then saying until a consensus is reached, we're not going to change how we do things. A righteous entity won't wait until the law tells them that something's wrong before they realize something's wrong and stop it. They will stop the thing that's wrong because they see that it's wrong, and they know it's a moral obligation. And EA and FIFA, well, we know moral obligation is certainly not at the top of their list of priorities. Eurogamer then brings up the point that multiple UK organizations have said the same thing, backed up by thorough research by 2 respected universities. If there is a chance that they're right, that they could affect children in this way, that children are most at risk of becoming problem gamblers as a result of loot box design in FIFA, Peggy 3 game for everyone, even if there's a small risk, don't you think it would be the right thing to do to change the way the game works? I love this question. Bruzo responded with this: kids should not be spending in our game. Children should not be spending in FIFA. Straight from the horse's mouth, except here's the hypocrisy and contradiction. It wasn't so long ago that when FIFA was confronted by UK regulators, they said that FIFA loot boxes, that FIFA card packs, are akin to Kinder Eggs. You know, the chocolate that parents tend to purchase for kids. And it was outright stated, we don't believe that loot boxes are harmful for kids because these are fun surprises. So you've got Bruzo here saying one thing and other executives saying something else. The common thread here is that EA says whatever they need to say to the audience that they need to appeal to. So with the journalists, you'll say, oh yeah, no, children shouldn't be spending in our game. But then when faced with regulators who are trying to regulate how children do engage with FIFA loot boxes and spend money aggressively because they don't know any better and don't have impulse control, to the regulators, they'll say, oh, no, it's just Kinder Eggs. It's exactly like that. It's for kids. It's totally okay. Totally harmless. But here, by EA's admission, kids should not be playing in our game. Except EA doesn't give enough of a shit to do anything about it. They'll be happy to retain that Peggy 3 rating or that E for everyone rating for their soccer games that are rated lower than Pokemon Red, which is utterly ridiculous. They're more than happy to maintain the status quo regardless of the harm that they're causing. So saying the words is one thing, taking action is another, and EA has certainly not taken action, though this right here, this could be potentially used in court to bring up that EA has admitted by their own words that kids should not be spending in our game, and that could potentially move forward the initiative of changing game ratings to reflect loot boxes. Hopefully this quote yields something. This is not an insignificant quote to have as ammunition. Eurogamer then brings up, but kids do spend. They shouldn't be spending, you say, but they do. Bruzo said, well, we see very low percentage of accounts of people under the age of 18. Again, bringing up the argument, well, it's a minority of people, so who cares about those people, even though it is still a significant portion of people, even though you're still harming people. And the fact that this guy can have that mentality, well, if it's a minority of people who are getting harmed, then what's the problem? Like, that goes to highlight the executive mentality and how disconnected this guy is as a human being. I mean, if this guy cared about people and, wants to present himself as also being a human being, then he has to also show that he cares about other human beings. And then he says, but most importantly, our default is set to no spending for accounts under 18, and we work with Sony and we work with Microsoft to also institute spending controls as a default for children. Kids should not be spending in FIFA, full stop. Instead of implementing systems that don't ultimately work, how about just changing your game to reflect that E for everyone rating, or increasing the rating of your game to reflect the fact that there is gambling in there and that it is an adult game? I mean, and when you say kids, by the way, kids, the definition, technically, under 18. Teenagers are considered kids as well. They spend money on FIFA as well. So, in a way, you're saying, you're right, this game should be rated 18 plus. So why don't we get there instead of just saying the thing that people want to hear? Now, here's a big hitter. Oh, I love this question. You say kids should not be spending in FIFA, then why did you advertise FIFA points in a children's magazine, which I did cover in a previous video, and they 100% did this, and they got enough backlash that they actually had to pull out from that. Chris Bruzo said, let me say again, we are human. That was my team. That was my team that did that. It was an oversight. How can that be an oversight? It was literally somebody checking boxes of places to put FIFA ads, and then a process by which we normally review where those ads are going to, and we missed that step. We have apologized. We said it was a mistake. We do make mistakes, Wes. The mistake wasn't that they accidentally put the ad in the children's magazine. The mistake was that they overstepped, and then they took a step back because they realized, oh, no, we probably shouldn't do this. Regulators will really encroach on this. these were calculated moves with calculated intentions. And when the clapback got a bit too much, they pulled back. That's not a mistake. That is just steering the ship another way to make yourself look good. Eurogamer then brought up a quote from the House of Lords Gambling Committee's report on loot boxes. If a product looks like gambling and feels like gambling, it should be regulated as gambling. In response, Chris Bruzzo said, "You don't have a way of cashing out. Isn't that fundamentally what gambling is?" So this is one of the issues with the current definition of gambling, this idea that you have to be able to cash out for it to be gambling, when all that is required is for somebody to want something badly enough that they'll keep spending money for the chance to obtain that thing. The emotional attachment is what matters most. Even if it's for a cosmetic skin that cannot be cashed out, if a player desires that very badly and it's a very rare item and they're willing to spend however much money, or are just too compelled by the prospect of getting this item that they will be spending all this money impulsively, then that's gambling. And FIFA in particular exploits this, not just because it's a pay-to-win loot box system, but also the players, the soccer players that are represented in this game, there is a huge fandom surrounding them. There are people who are emotionally invested in these players and want them just because they love Lionel Messi or Cristiano Ronaldo and whatever famous player. These are highly coveted players, not just for the gameplay effect or their monetary value, but because of who they are, because of how many people are emotionally attached to them and are fans of them. But on the topic of cashing out, Eurogamer notes you can cash out. I can do a quick Google search now and sell my FIFA Ultimate Team coins. FIFA Ultimate Team coins is one of the items you can get in your loot boxes. I can sell them for real money, and it's super easy. Indeed, it's hardly difficult to find a third-party website that exploits the gambling platform that EA has created here. Chris Bruzzo's response: the sellers on the black market, the ones that are actually making money, those are criminals. So I'm not sure where we're going with this argument. I mean, you've said it yourself. Criminals are using your platform to make money in illicit ways because you've set the foundation for such a platform. You're the ones who have implemented systems in such a way that such a thing is allowed to happen. And you've done nothing about it, because doing something about it would affect your bottom line, and you care more about your bottom line than your customers and their health and their well-being. So where we're going with this, Bruzzo, is that if your game is in such a state that criminals can exploit it to make money, maybe it's time to reconsider its design. Eurogamer then says, okay, you say you can cash out, but if you look at the research published earlier this year, commissioned by the Gamble Aware charity, that report, and I quote here again, many gamers do ascribe discrete financial values to loot box contents based on purchase or resale price, suggesting that many loot boxes meet existing criteria for gambling regulation. I don't believe that financial value should be the criteria to define whether something's gambling or not. Again, there is the emotional value component, but even in the current language of the law, because of how FIFA works and because you can technically cash out and because people place monetary value on loot box items for these types of games, it still holds up. So even if you couldn't cash out in a black market or accept that it isn't an issue, the fact that gamers ascribe discrete financial value to what's in loot boxes has the same effect. People really covet this stuff. Bruzzo's response is basically, yeah, we hear you, and again, we are taking action, but again, it's mostly insignificant action that's hardly had any sort of impact. They're just trying to look proactive, not actually being proactive. And with any potential of making progress on this front, EA has fought back against that. What does that tell you? Eurogamer then asked, would you ever consider taking out the ability to spend real-world money on FIFA Ultimate Team's loot boxes? Chris Bruzzo responded as follows. The ability to spend real-world money in the game represents choice for players. Again, there is no real choice. There's only strong arming. I'm 52 years old as of about a month ago. At 52, I don't have as much time as I did before. When I was 22, I could play and build the kind of team that I wanted to build. I assure you, even at 22 years old, Bruzzo, if you're playing this game legitimately, you cannot possibly hope to achieve the dream team that you want. People have done calculations. This Twitter thread in particular by Scuts TV highlights just how much time and money it takes to assemble a dream team like this one. For such a dream team, if you approach it purely through gameplay, it takes 916 days of 24/7 gameplay. That's well over 2 years of straight gameplay. And if you do it purely spending money, then we're looking at a figure of roughly 79, almost 80,000 pounds, which is over $100,000 worth of FIFA points in order to create this dream team. So either you have to be very rich or literally have no life. And keep in mind, progress doesn't carry over to the next FIFA game, so you literally don't have enough time to make a dream team like this because FIFA is an annualized franchise. So this notion that if he were younger and had more time, he could build his dream team is wrong. And this idea that players have a choice is 100% wrong. The choice of two awful paths is no choice at all. Eurogamer then swings again. I think you're downplaying the spending real-world money aspect of Ultimate Team. You're making the point that the minority spend, but we know from EA's own financial reports that Ultimate Team as a mode makes an incredible amount of money, way beyond the dollar sales of the game itself. Yes, the minority spend, but it's obviously EA's mega money spinner. And that's another good point. Within that minority, which is still a significant portion of people, the fact that so much revenue is being generated from such a minority of players goes to highlight just how much these people spend. And some of them might just be rich enough that they're able to spend that much money, and if they want to spend that money on FIFA loot boxes, that's their choice. But there are others who are just addicted. We have seen plenty of news reports and research on this. That stuff does happen. These are the whales, and some of these whales are not rich. They just can't help themselves, and these are the people that EA takes advantage of to run their business. The statement continues, and in financial documents, EA has said a change in government legislation may significantly impact the business. EA is clearly aware of the importance of spending in Ultimate Team. Eurogamer then raises an interesting question. What will you, EA, do if the UK government returns its report by the end of this year as it's expected to, and says flat out that loot boxes should be considered in class as gambling? What will you do then? Chris Pruso's response reads, "We will work with the government. We are ready. We are already at the table. We continue to bring actions all the time. We'll bring more. We are ready," says the man working for the company that tried to take Belgium to court after Belgium ruled that within their definition of gambling, loot boxes should be considered gambling and regulated as such. They're not trying to work with the government. They're just trying to ensure that the government is on their side. The last thing EA seems to be willing to do is work with government officials and regulators who go counter to their business strategy. Pruso then makes the classic argument that we need the money. It takes resources to make these games over and over again. It just does, says the man working for the company, basically releasing the same game every year, or a version of the game that's basically a patched version of the previous year's game. It has some differences here and there. They update the roster, but that stuff could be done through a patch, an update. But they resell that game and they wipe the slate clean on the microtransactions purchases so they can further monetize players. They know what they're doing. And they certainly don't need to push monetization that hard to stay in business and to develop these games. This is bullshit, this notion that we need to monetize this hard to keep the lights on. They just want to make all the money, not enough money. Pruso finishes off with, "We need those revenues in order to continue to pay our developers so they can continue to make more value and make the game more fun over time." I love how he makes it about having to pay developers when executives are getting paid millions upon millions of dollars that could be disseminated to developers, because these executives don't deserve to be paid that much more than what ground floor developers make. I don't see that changing. I think players are clearly responding to the fun that they're having with ongoing content being distributed in the game. I think we're going to continue to do that. Players are responding to this being their only choice for a soccer game, because again, FIFA is pretty much a monopoly on soccer simulation games. It's the only one that's really truly significant. And the reason players spend is because it's the only viable form of progression. Doing it through gameplay, again, to build your dream team, you couldn't do it even if you play 24/7 for an entire year. And so, of course, players have to spend. Again, it's really no choice at all. And even the people who do enjoy FIFA will tell you, yeah, the loot boxes need to be dialed back, and that there is a more fun FIFA out there to be made if it weren't for the greedy intentions behind EA's business model. If it weren't an annualized franchise that forces developers to only make small incremental upgrades every year because they just don't have the time to make a full-fledged, truly new game, or one that has a significant upgrade over the previous entry. If it weren't for the loot boxes that Ultimate Team is centered around, thereby ruining the gameplay loop that lures players into microtransactions, purchases that strong arms players into that prioritizes that above all else. That, ladies and gentlemen, was the last question from Eurogamer, and I'll once again give Eurogamer and Wesley Yin Poole here a big shout out for the fantastic questions, and EA's responses speak for themselves. This executive's responses, how dismissive it is when real questions, when tough questions are asked, how his arguments and points and justifications constantly contradict each other, how hypocritical his responses are. It says everything you need to know about EA and the intentions behind FIFA. It isn't to make the best soccer experience possible, it's to make the best monetization machine possible. There's just no argument with the interview here and all of the evidence that's out there. It doesn't take a genius to figure that out, and no amount of denial from EA is gonna change my mind unless we see tangible action that suggests EA is trying to change FIFA's course for the better. I don't foresee that happening anytime soon, so long as FIFA continues to be EA's golden geese, or until the government steps in, government organizations from around the world, and that way change the status quo. But whether that happens or not, only time will tell. Until then, let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on this Eurogamer interview and the responses provided by EA's Bruzo. And to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.